All eyes on the tropics, not on Fiona, not on Gaston, but really on what is forecast to become our next named storm, possibly Hermine, trekking westward across warm Atlantic waters. Hello from your hurricane headquarters. We're going to answer all your questions, go over the latest models here on Tracking the Tropics. Hey there, folks. JB here with you alongside Jeff Baradelli, Rebecca Barry, and our featured meteorologist, WGNO Chief Meteorologist Hank Allen, joining us in the top right-hand portion of your screen. Great to have Hank back on the program. We really want to focus on 98L in this episode, but before we do, we're going to ask you, of course, to file in your questions starting now. See the hashtags all around your screen. Hashtag Hey Jeff, Rebecca, Hank. We'll be looking for them and be answering them in just a few minutes. But to start, let's send things over to Jeff Baradelli, WFLA's chief meteorologist, for the very latest on 98L and a couple of other systems out there in the Atlantic. Jeff.
It is busy, JB. Yeah, all of a sudden, I mean, the season just lit up like a Christmas tree, and there's lots going on across the Atlantic right now. Of course, that right there is Fiona. Fiona was a devastating storm in the Dominican Republic, in Puerto Rico, and actually, it's probably going to be a very impactful storm in places like Halifax and Newfoundland. We'll talk more about that later on. There's also Gaston, which is a tropical storm. Winds are, I think, are around 65 miles an hour right now, as of the latest advisory on that. The one we're watching most closely, of course, 98L, that has a 90% chance of development. There's also another area of thunderstorms here in the central Atlantic that has a 30% chance of development, and behind that, another wave that's moving off Africa with a 50% chance of development. So, you know, it went from being completely asleep for about 2 months solid to being very active right here at the peak of hurricane season. In fact, we're just slightly past the peak of hurricane season now. Okay, so take a look at this. That right there, of course, is Fiona. And believe it or not, Fiona is having an impact on this tropical wave that we're watching right now, keeping it at bay, keeping it weak and disorganized and disheveled right now. There's a little bit of dry air to the north. You can see that right there, but that's not going to play a part with this system. It's got enough of a moist envelope to not have to worry about that. But let me show you what I mean in terms of the impact of Fiona on our tropical wave. If you look closely enough, you can see this outflow, this wind shear emanating out of Fiona. So this system is still kind of in the shadow, if you will, of Fiona. However, Fiona is obviously moving north. This system is going to be moving westward, and once it gets into the Caribbean, especially the Central Caribbean, conditions are very favorable for not only development but also intensification as well. So here's the latest in terms of the spaghetti model plots, our different computer models that we run out over the next several days. And into next week, you know, it's still very uncertain. First of all, it has to form for the computer models to get a better handle on exactly where it's going to go. But it's still a week in the future before it gets to this realm right here. And so there's a large envelope of possibilities. It could move into the Yucatan. It could even move east towards the east coast of Florida, even the Bahamas. So this is the most likely scenario here as we head into the future. So let's kind of diagnose what's happening around the system and see what kind of factors might inhibit it or help it as it heads into the Caribbean over the next couple of days. First of all, it's got a very moist envelope. There's really not much dry air to kind of stop the system, but right now at least, its interaction with South America and the outflow from Fiona stopping it right now, but that's not likely to last very long. Over the weekend, once it gets in the central part of the Caribbean, and maybe before that, probably before that, it will form into a depression. But you can see right here, there's plenty of moisture around it, so dry air is not going to help. Also, the high wind shear is way up towards us here in Tampa and New Orleans as well, and to the northeast of the Dominican Republic and right over Puerto Rico. But look at this. This is a kind of a nurturing incubator type environment right here across the Caribbean. By the weekend, very low wind shear, which is going to help this system to kind of breathe and get stronger. And then in addition, it's warm enough regardless of whether water temperatures are below or above normal in the Caribbean or the Gulf this time of year. So it doesn't matter if temperatures were even below normal or at normal, but they're not. They're 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit above normal across both of those basins. In addition, it's going to move over some of the highest ocean heat content that we have in our part of the world. And it's right here near the Yucatan Channel, up through the Loop Current, and then down into the northwestern part of the Caribbean. And notice, almost all the computer models take it right over some of the highest ocean heat content, which when we say ocean heat content, it's not only surface warmth, it's also deep warmth. So it's warm throughout the water column, and that tends to kind of aid and abet these systems. All right, let's show you the GFS versus the European model. The GFS right here is in green. The European model is in red, and we're just getting the new Euro in right now. So this is actually the one from last night. And there's been a big divergence this morning the American model, the GFS model, has gone much further west into the central Gulf. And the European model from last night was right through the Florida Keys and then eventually to the northeast of that. So quite a spread, right? It's not going to end up exactly where the Euro says it's going to end up. It's not going to end up exactly where the GFS says. It's going to be somewhere in that envelope of possibilities. So right now it is too uncertain to know. But we do know it has the capacity of not only becoming a hurricane, but likely a strong hurricane. All signs are pointing to that. All right, I want to show you two more graphics, and then I'm going to go sit down and we're going to answer some questions and talk with all of our experts. So the steering flow from the European model, again, this is last night's European, a trough of low pressure, a big dip in the jet stream right there. And then you can see that because this jet stream remains in place across the Northeast and Great Lakes, it keeps this steering flow over the Gulf of Mexico. And so as the system starts to move north out of the Caribbean, it feels the steering flow and it's steered kind of more to the northeast back towards the state of Florida. Now, this is the American model from this morning, and you'll notice the jet stream right there, not stuck in the Great Lakes or the Northeast. This actually pushes out into the Atlantic. That allows the steering flow to continue pushing north and west, and that also opens the door to this system moving further north into the Gulf and not steering right into the west coast of Florida. So these are completely different steering flows here. And the resultant steering flow is really going to determine exactly where the system goes. All right, so with all that said, why don't I toss it back to you, JB, and we can get going with some questions and talk to all of our experts.
Yeah, I'd like to get Hank and Rebecca involved here. Hank, just really quickly, your observations before we get to our meteorologist Q&A.
Yeah, I mean, I echo pretty much everything he said. I really think this is going to be one of those storms that if you go back to maybe an 05, like a Wilma, even a couple of years ago in that active 2020 season where we saw a couple of those storms hit the Yucatan, they really just blew up in that section of the Caribbean that Jeff was pointing out there. And so, I think this has all the makings of a system that really sort of bombs out. We hear that term a lot of times with these low pressure systems in the Caribbean. I mean, just all the factors there, the warm water, the lack of wind shear. We don't quite have the MGAO, which is something I've talked about for the past couple of years that allows these storms to strengthen a lot of times. That's sort of neutral. So it'll be interesting to see if that plays a factor in this. But other than that, it's just all the ingredients are there for intensification. And I think anybody really from, at this point, probably Lake Charles to Tampa really has to be watching this closely, because I think you are likely to look at a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico at some point next week. And then, of course, as we said, it's way too early to tell. A lot of times a storm coming from that path, the big factor for me is, does it go through the Yucatan Channel? And if it does, not only does it maintain its strength, but a lot of times it comes up closer to where I am here in southeast Louisiana. If it does clip sort of that western tip of Cuba, a lot of times you get a little bit farther east, over towards Mobile to Apalachicola, something like that. So, obviously it's still way too early to tell when this is going to, develop into something major, where it's going to go from that point. The longer it stays weak, the farther west it tends to go. Once it starts to intensify, it starts to get pulled a little bit north more quickly. But at the end of the day, everybody in the Northern Gulf really needs to be watching this closely. Hopefully you've got your supplies and your preparations ready to go, because I think this could be a significant system.
Hank Allen joining us from New Orleans. Jeff, Rebecca, and myself are here in Tampa, Florida. We're 30 seconds away from getting to your questions. Use any of the hashtags on the black stripes around your screen. Hashtag Hey Hank, Rebecca, Jeff, JB. We'll look for all of them. We've got a bunch loaded in the queue. But really quickly, Rebecca, the GFS, the Euro kind of split here, and right in the middle of that split is the Gulf.
Yes, and so that's one of the reasons that we have a relatively high confidence that this system will enter the Gulf. We have a very low confidence on where it will end up once it enters the Gulf. And there are two main factors in my mind that we need to get past before we really know where the system's headed. And the first is it needs to form. The forecast models get so much better and so much more accurate once they have an actual center of rotation to begin their forecasting from. And also once we start flying Hurricane Hunter aircraft through these systems, we're going to get data points and much better information, not only about the system itself, but also the environment around it and that it will be moving into. So that's the first one. So I think over the weekend is when the forecast models will get a lot more accurate in terms of that. And then the second thing that I think is the big question mark in my mind is interaction with land, whether it scrapes by Cozumel, like the American model showing right now, or clips over Cuba, like the European model showing right now. Land interaction is always a question mark with these systems. It changes the trajectory just a little bit. It weakens it just a little bit sometimes. And so the second question mark, I think, on where this thing ends up and when we know is the possible land interaction with Cuba or Mexico.
We're answering your questions in our meteorologist Q&A powered by Handyman Roofing. Let's get to it. It's very simple, folks. In our Facebook Live comment section, use a hashtag Ask a Question. Kelly is asking over on my Facebook page. We'll start with this one, hashtag HJB. Do y'all think that the likelihood of a panhandle impact is looking more inevitable? And folks on the panhandle, the northern Gulf Coast, they have had a lot of tropical activity to worry about in recent years. So what do we say here for this question? Hank, why don't we start with you, considering that's, of course, where you're joining us from, the northern Gulf Coast?
Yeah, I'd say probably equal chances right now from anywhere, around the mouth of the river here where I am, Lower Plaquemines Parish, all the way through the Panhandle. I think, like Rebecca said, you have to watch, does this clip that western side of Cuba? That tends to mess with these storms a little bit, reminiscent of like a Gustav maybe back in '08 when we had a major hurricane, and then it went over the western side of Cuba and it came up as a Category 1, changes the track, changes the intensity. But you really have to wait and see, as I always tell the viewers around here, it's like you really don't have a sure idea most of the time until it gets past that Yucatan Channel area between the peninsula there and Cuba. And then once you go past that, obviously you have a pretty good idea. But, I'd give it equal chances at this point from New Orleans all the way over to, let's say, Tallahassee. To me, you could still get that bend off to the east as well, farther down the peninsula. But right now, I'd put equal chances across the northern Gulf.
Cassie Peters from the WFLA Facebook page asking hashtag HJB, is it going to hit Florida? It's the most common question that we get asked out of our Facebook Live comment section. Let's point this out, though. When we're talking about a storm in the Atlantic like this, we're talking about the Gulf Coast side of Florida, Tampa, the Tampa Bay area. We're not on the great side of this thing to be on. If this thing does curve towards the Panhandle and we're on the, of course, that east side of it, Jeff, that could have, of course, that doesn't bode well for us.
Yeah, and of course it depends on where it goes, right? I mean, Florida's a big state. We have a lot of coastline. This storm will be expanding its size as it moves over the Gulf of Mexico and kind of taps into the upper level wind flow. But so much of it just depends upon where the storm goes. I'm just looking at the latest European model, by the way.
Did it come in?
Yeah, it just came in. And
is there any way to load it up? It just came in moments ago.
So there it is.
Here, I'll bring up a little bit larger there. So,
I mean, that's just one model run, though. That's just one run. It's going to change again and again and again. So that is just slightly west of where it was last night. Last night it was over the lower Keys and then into like Naples. This is slightly west of that into Fort Myers and across like Orlando. So it would be very similar to Charlie. However, again, that's going to change. That's just one model run of one model. And we have a lot of models that we look at. So I wouldn't read too much into this. Just that, there's a big envelope of possibilities here. And it's anywhere from, I would say, South Florida. It's even conceivable that it heads just east of South Florida, although I'd say a limited chance of that, all the way west, obviously, as Hank was talking about.
How about this one from Kathy, hashtag Hey Jeff. We'll send it right back over to you, Jeff. Saying, my daughter and sister-in-law just flew into St. Thomas today through Saturday. Any chance that they will get in this?
No, St. Thomas is far north of this. This is going to go south near the ABC Islands, and then it's going to track northwestward towards the Cayman Islands. So the Cayman Islands may have to be concerned about this. Jamaica has a slight chance you may have to be concerned about this. But the Eastern Islands don't have to worry about this one.
I have two PSAs that I'd like to make really quickly as I'm looking at some of the comments coming into our queue. We're seeing all of your hashtag-based comments coming in on Facebook Live across multiple Facebook pages that we're tracking right now, thanks to digital content producer extraordinaire Heather Monahan. Couple of notices. The word evacuation, way too early to be talking about any. We don't even have a name system as of yet. We don't even have a lockdown on where the storm is heading and whether or not it's going to be an intense storm. While, of course, we have these long-range models that are giving us an idea, it hasn't, as Jeff and Rebecca and Hank have been noting here on stream, the system is not yet formed, so we do not have a really good idea as to evacuations. We're not even in that territory just anywhere remotely close to that territory just yet. The other thing, too, be careful what you find on social media, folks, because I have seen some graphics of people making forecast cones on social media and trying to, generate retweets and shares and stuff like that. That's just attention-grabbing behavior at this point. While there are some long-range models, be very careful what you click on and what you actually accept to be the truth when it comes to models at this stage in a storm's formation. But let's get to Cindy's question, Rebecca, because this one is pertinent. How many days notice will we get as to its path? When do we have a better, when's the pivot point when we actually have a really good idea as to where the storm is headed and how intense it might be?
Yeah, so let's talk about the timing, because we are talking about this unusually early, and it is because of the information age. People do make crazy social media posts about long-term forecast models 9 days out, and we're providing context that that's not accurate. And I think over the weekend, it'll be moving to the south of Hispaniola and to the south of Jamaica. I think at that point, we're going to get a true center of rotation, and at that point, I'm going to start paying a little bit more attention to the long-term forecast models. Of course, I'm always poring over them, but they have a little bit more weight in my mind once the system actually forms. And then the second refining point, if you will, for the forecast moving forward is when it crosses over the Yucatan Channel. So when it moves past Cozumel and Cuba, that's when I think we'll really know exactly what areas to target. And at that point, we'll be 2 to 4 days out, depending on where it ends up and which direction it heads, as to crossing that Yucatan Channel, getting a good model run based on where it is, if it has any land interaction during that time, and if that changes the center of rotation as a result. And if it's going to slow down or speed up, that could also change things. We've seen the storms that get out in the Gulf and just sit there churning for a little bit, and that's a possibility, moving forward. All things are a possibility at this point, but it does look like, I think the two main things are this weekend when it actually forms and we get that good center of rotation, and then the second one is about Tuesday, Wednesday of next week once it crosses that Yucatan Channel.
We have our regulars, as you guys know, on Tracking the Tropics, folks who haven't missed an episode, or maybe missed one or two, but really haven't missed many episodes this year. Brody is one of them. This one's coming your way, Hank, saying that seeing that an aircraft will be going into the area this evening, I wouldn't be shocked to see potential tropical cyclone advisories coming out tonight or tomorrow. Thoughts? What do you have to say for Brody here?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. The PTC advisories, they kind of aggravate me in general. I think they
aggravate me too. You're not alone.
It's like, why do we need to change the term? Just put out a cone if you want to. That's not really a knock on the NHC. I know their intentions are good on that, but it's certainly possible that we see that tonight. I think more likely you're going to maybe wait till it starts getting a little bit closer to some land interaction here. I mean, this thing is still so far to the south. And again, I never know what these guys are looking at in terms of, their time frame wanting to put those out. I would wager, though, that they've got such a high percentage on this thing that if a plane goes down there and sees something even remotely close to a circulation, we probably just jump right into tropical depression stage just because we're so close to being, considering that at this point anyway. So it's possible, but I would almost say they wait maybe a day or two on that if there is nothing there, just until you start getting that cone, the would-be cone, a little bit closer to maybe some land interaction there. But so close. I was really surprised yesterday they had such a high 2-day percentage on this thing, simply because yesterday, I mean, it really looked like garbage. It was hard to pick up. It almost looked like an elongated trough that was tied all the way into Gaston on the satellite last night. So, it's starting to look a little bit better now. I still think you're probably a day or two out from really seeing these forecast products being issued.
Jeff, anything to vent about
with the
PTC?
I agree completely. I don't understand why the 2-day was 70% yesterday. Yeah. I understand the 90% in 5 days. It just seemed like they were trying to get it going too quickly. It's looking a little more healthy than it looked yesterday, but it's still dealing with land interaction, it's still dealing with the outflow and wind shear from Fiona.
Let's get to this question. Coming back your way, Jeff, Andre, and I'll bring up Rebecca on this one too. What's the chances of the system hitting the East Coast? I mean, again, early, but what do we say for Andre?
Well, I mean, it just seems less likely, but not completely unlikely. It's still possible. It really just depends on how fast it gets its legs. How fast does it develop in the central Caribbean? Because if it develops faster, it will probably move north faster. So I would not take the East Coast out of the realm of possibilities, but I would say this is looking, I'd say, more and more like a Gulf storm. If anything has happened this morning with our computer models, and again, they'll shift back probably tonight, but there's been a slight west track shift on just about, or at least a number of them.
It's starting to feel, especially with this morning's Euro, it felt a little bit like Irma because we didn't know if it was going to be an East Coast storm or a West Coast storm, and then the path that it eventually took. That's what I thought of when I looked at the forecast models this morning. I was like, ooh, that's not pretty.
Yeah, but we have plenty of time to watch it. You know, one thing that we should bring up, because you talked about evacuations, GB, and Rebecca's great at this. Just, you know, the idea that at this point, what do we do? What is the actionable item for our viewers? And I would say the same thing for New Orleans or anyone along the Gulf Coast. And that, for me at least, at this point, is make sure that your hurricane safety kit is replenished, that any old stuff is taken out, any new stuff is put in. Make sure you didn't steal anything from it, like Rebecca likes to say. So that's the stage that we're at right now, right? Just, and then maybe tomorrow, make sure that you and your family have a plan and that you discuss that plan with them. That would be by the weekend or something. So it's a stepped process. And
the only exceptions are if you're like me and you know that you're possibly going to be working 24 hours. I made a plan for my dog because the dog needs a plan, and you got to make those plans early. And so the only exceptions are if you care for a family member that requires electricity medically. And so it's really the outliers. If you have a special situation that you would start making a plan now. We're really just asking everyone to just pay attention, especially over the weekend, because some of those decisions, once we know more about the system and we have a better idea what should happen over the weekend, that would be a time that you're probably not as worried about the weather as normal. So we're just asking you to pay a little bit more attention right now.
Shout out to Sunny in our Facebook comment section, who was talking about making sure you have a plan for your fur babies. Yeah, thinking of all the dogs, cats, and all of our friendly pets at home. Always have a plan for everybody in your household. I'm going to come your way, Hank, for this question from Pam from the WKRG Facebook page. Between the Florida Panhandle and between where you are, Hank, in New Orleans, is the Mississippi Gulf Coast and the Alabama Gulf Coast, where Mobile, Alabama is. Mobile, what do we say for Pam's comment here?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100% you're in the realm of possibility here. As I mentioned a little bit earlier on a previous question, I think anywhere from New Orleans to probably Tallahassee, I would put it about an equal chance of not only being impacted, but being directly impacted by this at this point. We're talking about the spread of these models and, so really that includes anybody along the Northern Gulf. And we're talking about the time frame here. Again, today's the 21st, and you look at the GFS right there on the 30th, sort of in the Central Gulf. So, kind of your point, JB, about social media and obviously I love doing this show. I think this is one of the best shows out there to give people sort of an analysis of what's going on. But nevertheless, we're still talking about a week away. So you got to caution yourself here against anxiety burnout from this thing. I mean, today's Wednesday. Next Wednesday, we'll have obviously a much better idea. And I agree with Rebecca over the weekend, but this is still not even in the Gulf probably until even a week from now. As you can see there on the timing of that American model there. That's next Thursday. That's still 8 days out. So, anybody in the Northern Gulf at this point, you need to be prepared. And as we said, refresh those kits and have a plan, maybe have an idea of where you would go if you need to evacuate and that sort of thing. But, I still think everybody has an equal chance at this point. I've been saying here I would lean more towards an eastern curve away from New Orleans, maybe over towards Alabama or the Florida Panhandle, but that's no guarantee. I mean, this thing is so far to the south. It's missing. If it was a little farther north right now, you'd have a little bit better chance of that northeast turn, but it's going to be missing a lot of these steering currents, this trough, this cold front we're talking about early next week. It's going to be missing a lot of that just because it's starting so far to the south. And then, once it gets to where it's lifting north, there's just sort of an amorphous flow, if you will. There's not really a truly defined flow, at least in the forecast models right now, as you get into the middle and end of next week. It's just sort of weak, and these things just sort of tend to drift around. You're sort of waiting to see, which way it's going, and they sort of lift to the north at that point. So, yeah, I mean, Mobile, I think you need to be as concerned with this as anybody in Tallahassee, anybody in New Orleans, and all along the Northern Gulf at this point.
Let's talk about what the elephant in the room with this system as we're tracking it. Hank was talking about the heightened sense of anxiety. This has been such a bizarre hurricane season, which I think everyone is a little bit more anxious. Like, okay, there's going to be a storm that's going to impact this. It's just a matter of if and when and how is it going to hit. Where's it going to be? Tampa? Is it going to be Mobile? Is it going to be Austin, Texas? Where is it exactly going to be? So there also too, if we had already several storms, if it was like 2020, I think we're talking context-wise, this is completely different.
Yeah.
But the anxiety is certainly real. It's palpable, as Hank was noting. Two more questions before we end out this edition of Tracking the Tropics, folks. Let's go to WMBB's Facebook page on the Panhandle. Jenny Rogers saying, #KJB, it's coming up. Hurricane Michael's anniversary here in Panama City, Florida. Could we see any impacts similar to the damage that we had from Michael? I just wanted to get this comment on screen because Hurricane Michael, of course, the destruction that hurricane caused for the Panhandle, I remember we were covering it here on Tracking the Tropics, and there's still folks, Jeff and Rebecca, that are recovering from it to this day.
Yeah, Hurricane Michael was a monster, that's for sure. And the question being, is it possible that we could see something like a Michael again? And I can't say that I could take that possibility completely off the table at this point. But no two hurricanes are alike, and hopefully lightning doesn't strike the same town twice, right? But with all that said, we do think this is going to be a major hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. So I'm reluctant to take, any possibilities off the table. Hopefully there will be enough wind shear. There's been hints, at least in, let's say, the European model, that there could be enough of a prevailing, wind in the upper atmosphere left over in the northern Gulf to kind of weaken this a little bit. But that's just one model. The other models aren't quite showing that. Is this my next question?
Well, just throwing this, you were just talking about it being a major hurricane. Right. So this coming right in from Debbie asking about the category of a storm. So you're saying it could be Cat 3 or higher.
There are no necessarily limits to how strong it could get. It just depends upon, does it stay over the water? Does it go right over the highest ocean heat content? Does it go through the Yucatan Channel? Does it go over the Gulf Loop current? If it takes that track, well, there's really no limit to how strong it can be necessarily. So I think, and I don't know if Hank and Rebecca would agree with me, I think it's probably headed for major hurricane status, probably Cat 3, possibly Cat 4. Could it be a 5? That's not out of the realm of possibilities, but I'll let you guys chime in on that.
I was going to say, I agree. I think major hurricane is certainly in play with this. I mentioned the MJO earlier, which is really technical. I don't want to get too much into it. It's the Mann-Julian oscillation. We don't have the favorable level of that in the Gulf that we've had the past couple of years when some of these storms have just blown up last minute, like an Ida, like a Michael, like a Laura. So I think all the other ingredients are there for a 3 or a 4. I mean, let's face it, we only have, 4 Cat 5s hit the U.S., as a Cat 5. And so, to say it would be another Michael, and like we said, you can't compare them, but to say it would be another one, I think is, there's not a high percentage chance of that. But keep in mind, there's a lot of other factors. I mean, Michael was a huge windstorm, certainly. But, you look at the factors of how long it's over the Gulf, the angle it's coming into the coast. I mean, you could have a weaker system that produces more storm surge as opposed to the wind damage that Michael had. I mean, you look at Katrina, that was a Category 3 when it hit. Obviously, we don't expect this one to necessarily sit over the Gulf as long, but the longer it's over the water, the more buildup it has for storm surge. And so that's another factor that you have to look at. It's not just about wind speed, it's about the timing that it has to build up, how early it strengthens. Laura, for instance, strengthened late, so maybe not quite the storm surge it would have had if it strengthened 2 days earlier, that sort of thing. So many different factors. And of course, storm surge really the most dangerous aspect of these storms. 50%, if not more, loss of life comes from storm surge. So, that's always my main concern with these systems, along with, of course, the wind damage. But when you talk about the categories, it's based on wind speed. So I wouldn't get too wrapped up in that. I do agree that certainly a Category 3 or 4 is definitely on the table. And with all the ingredients that we mentioned, maybe even likely, depending on how early this gets going here. But so many other factors that each individual storm has that's what you have to pay attention to as opposed to comparing to previous ones.
Our last question, our meteorologist Q&A powered by Handyman Roofing. This isn't, maybe I'm a little biased that I'm getting great questions on my Facebook page. This one from Jerry Cat Jr., #KJB. Is it a myth or is there science to say that the Nature Coast has a protective aspect due to the shallow waters of the Gulf? Talking about our region of the state in Florida. This is something that comes up in regular conversation in everyday life outside. With the cameras off, I talk with folks and people have this myth that Tampa is always protected. That Tampa Bay will always be protected just because of that, exactly what Jerry was talking about with this comment. Fact or fiction, Jeff and Rebecca?
Well, you want to take it first, Rebecca, or do you want me to?
You can start.
Okay. Well, I would say that's fiction. Has nothing to do with the shallow waters of the eastern Gulf of Mexico. But it is harder to get a storm into the west coast of Florida than it is, say, the Panhandle or west towards New Orleans, or even, I'd say, the northeast part of Texas, simply because the storms actually have to, generally speaking, go north and then northeast. So they have to make that turn to the east. Now, what time of year could it possibly be that a storm would make that turn? And I would argue it's now. So it's now through October and into November if we have a hurricane season in November this year. That remains to be seen how active it'll be by then. But you can see it right there. That's the European model steering flow. And by the way, we're going to see our first quote unquote cool front this weekend here in the Tampa Bay area, where our temperatures will drop like 1.5 degrees. But the point is, and maybe not that much, maybe 1.25 degrees. But the point is that this is a result of the jet stream starting to dip down from Canada and our prevailing flow across the U.S. becoming more westerly, so moving from the west to the east. Sometimes these storms can move north and get caught by what the European is showing there, which is a steering flow. So the answer to your question is the myth, but it's hard unless it's later in the season, although Charlie was a bit earlier. Rebecca.
Charlie was earlier. Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that is sometimes the shallow waters of the Gulf could work against us in a storm surge sense, because the water gets a slow build as it moves over those shallower waters across the Gulf. And also because our inland waterways are much more shallow than, say, along some areas on the East Coast, we can't handle the volume of water once the storm surge does start to move inland. So it's much more flood prone as a result.
I like that we had the mention that, Jeff, we're expecting a cold front. We're going to lose 1.5 degrees. That was the only reason I chuckled.
Bundle up.
Yeah.
And that's not Celsius, unfortunately, for us, because then if it was Celsius, it'd be like close to 3 degrees or something like that. But
welcome to Florida, folks. Welcome to the Tampa Bay area. I'd like to thank our chief meteorologist from WGNO, our sister station in New Orleans, Hank Allen, who's been on more episodes than I can count of Tracking the Tropics. Basically,
but JB can't count. I mean, he can only get to 10.
A little bar, yeah.
Right, so that's.
I can't. I will try to get better at counting. Hank joining us from New Orleans. It's always great to have his perspective on the program. PSA, really quickly before we end out this episode, you might see a lot of social media activity about the name Hermine. And there is a chance, we just want to make this clear for our audience, there is a chance that the system that we've been focusing so much attention on in this episode, 98L, isn't Hermine. Right, Jeff? I mean, we're talking it could be Ian.
Yeah, there are 2 other systems out there that we're watching, and we mentioned it at the beginning, and either one of those 2 conceivably could develop before this one in the Caribbean. So it is conceivable that it could be Ian, right? It's possible. We'll see. I don't know.
You can visit trackingthetropics.tv in your phone browser, your browser on whatever device you use. Tracking the Tropics TV will give you all of your Tracking the Tropics content for our super fans out there. Previous episodes, write-ups by our extraordinary digital team here as well. And we are live Wednesdays, 2 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Central, in whatever app, website, or social media platform that you're watching on right now. And we have additional episodes as storms form. There is a pretty good chance that between now and next Wednesday, we will have additional episodes of Tracking the Tropics. So whatever website or app you're watching on right now, you can turn on push alerts or push notifications, whatever you do to actually access us on the site where you're watching. And of course, we'll bring you the expertise from our meteorologists across Nexstar Nation. Really, again, a thank you to Hank Allen, a thank you to Rebecca and Jeff. And folks, we'll see you next time on Tracking the Tropics, powered by Handyman Roofing.
Thank you for watching Tracking the Tropics.